Good morning. My name is Susanna Gurr, and I'm the Managing Director at the BC Centre for Employment Excellence. Welcome to this special 2-hour webinar. For those of you who are not familiar with the Centre, it was created in 2012 with funding from the provincial and federal governments to act as a research and knowledge sharing organization for BC employment service providers and employers. We apply innovative research in collaboration with community partners and employers. We also find ways to share information and best practices with practitioners and employers in order to integrate evidence into practice and to spark innovation. We created this webinar series as a way to reach out and connect with practitioners. Through this series, we have highlighted new research completed by the Centre, but also, more importantly, tapping into the knowledge and expertise in the employment services community and other sectors. The topic today is translating Aboriginal traditions to employment. I am very excited and honored to have with us our presenters and special guests here with us at the Centre and also online in Nunavut. They generously gave their time to share the knowledge and experience. Welcome, everybody, and a big thank you for being here. Like everyone online, I'm very keen to participate today and to learn and to take this knowledge forward. I will now turn it over to Andrea Doolan from Access Aboriginal Community Career and Employment Services Society to introduce our elders.
Good morning. I'd like to introduce Samagat Stutgum Laha, Joe Calder, and Skagum Lachla, Esther Calder.
Commission opening prayer and the song that we always sing up home is "In Thee, O Lord, do we put our trust to Thee." And I'll sing it in my own Indian language. Yaini no mi ta'yok lo yaini no mi ta'yok lo yaini no mi ta'yok lo yaini o mi ta'yok lo yaini o mi ta'yok lo yaini o mi yaini o mi ta'yok lo yaini o mi ta'yok lo yaini o mi ta'yok lo. We kadak yakum shamagi kinam tlai gun kabig maksud kaseon wul nain min alamat kutong kanwul. Amen.
Amen. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Joe and Esther for opening our session with song and prayer. I learned from our presenters last week that different nations have different traditional gifts, and in this territory, it's blankets. So I like to present you with these blankets and to wrap you with warmth, security, and love. And this one's for you, Esther. And to wrap you also in warmth, security, and love. Thank you.
Good morning. I'd like to go over the agenda overview, introductions with our territory recognition, keynote speaker Shelley Joseph on truth and reconciliation, Aboriginal people, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, friendship centers, ASET, Aboriginal Skills and Employment Training, stories, knowledge and experience, and seasonal and cultural traditions and employment.
I would like to introduce Shelley Joseph, Public Engagement Lead and Cultural Advisor for Reconciliation Canada. Hekwa Gaya Agwa, Shelley Joseph, daughter of Chief Dr. Robert Joseph, brings over 20 years of experience paired with education covering spiritual, physical, mental, and emotional well-being for families and communities. She is passionate about supporting First Nations people to take an active role in healing and growth, utilizing a holistic approach to well-being. Shelley has always followed traditional teachings through a lifetime of learning from elders and cultural leaders. She is highly involved in the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women initiatives and is a board member of the Circle of Eagles Lodge Society. Aligning with Reconciliation Canada's idea about creating a better tomorrow for our children, Shelley lives by the Kwikwakiwak law. If not for our children, what would our purpose be? She has always believed in the Kwikwakiwak phrase, Gwailayu, you are my reason for living. She is one of the lead facilitators for the Reconciliation Dialogue workshops and is one of Reconciliation Canada's inspiring public speakers. Rounding out her beliefs and cultural values, Shelley is excited to continue to move the work of Reconciliation Canada forward and be part of her father's legacy.
Thank you, Andrea. Gela Kesla, Nugwa Hekugela Oba Lasnacha Hekams Umpas Quinquin Kuligedzi. My traditional name is Hekugela Oba. My English name is Shelley Joseph. I'm the youngest daughter of Chief Dr. Robert Joseph. And currently I'm the Public Engagement Lead with Reconciliation Canada. I'm really excited to be here today to sit on the panel that we're with. I'd like to thank the elders for your prayer and your song starting us off in a good way. I think it's really important that we do that, that we acknowledge the Creator and our ancestors, and that we ask them to walk with us today and always, especially when we do important work like this, talking about, for myself, truth and reconciliation, and what does that mean, and how we can all play an integral part in reconciliation for all of Canada. A lot of people believe that this is an Indigenous issue, but really it's a Canadian issue. This history is part of Canada's history, and I think it's going to take all of us all together to move reconciliation forward. Of course, Reconciliation Canada, our mantra, if you will, is Namwayut, which means we are all one. Next slide. When I do our dialogue workshops in various communities we've gone across Canada, I ask everybody in the room to introduce themselves, and what that includes is your name, your traditional name, if you have one, and your ancestry, where your ancestors come from. And I think it's really important to do that because here in Canada, we have people from everywhere, from every corner of the world. We have such a vast diversity, and I think it's really important to acknowledge those diversities. And from those diversities, once we know them, it's easier to pull out the common humanity. And we at Reconciliation Canada really believe that the common humanity is what's going to weave our social fabric, so that my children and your children and our grandchildren aren't going to face the same discriminations that have been happening in Canada. So I'm actually asking all of you if you can just take a moment to think about your ancestry, where you're from. Personally, I come from the Kwakwala speaking people. Our territories are located on the northern tip of Vancouver Island and the adjacent mainland. I'm currently sitting on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people. I do have Scottish ancestry. I'm not too clear on names or where that came from or how it happened, but I know I do have that somewhere a few generations back. So asking all of you to be mindful and to really think of your history, your background, and where you're from as we move forward into my presentation specifically. Next slide. I'm going to be speaking about the history and impacts of residential schools and intergenerational trauma, meaning how is it still affecting us today? A lot of people think that this is something in history that happened a really long time ago, but there are people my age, I don't think I'm very old, by the way, who have gone to residential schools, so it's very much a reality today. It's not just history. Next slide. Over 150,000 little children went to these schools. From the stories that I've heard, from as young as 4 years old, these children were forcibly taken from their homes. It was made law here in Canada for all Aboriginal children to attend residential schools, and if parents refused, the parents were threatened with being arrested and put in jail. And of course, if they were arrested and put in jail, their children would go to the schools anyways. So a lot of these weren't voluntarily sending their children away. Next slide. In the 1840s, the first Indian residential schools opened here in Canada. The first residential school in British Columbia opened in Mission in 1861. In 1907, it was reported that 42% of the children in the schools died before the age of 16. A lot of those deaths were, there was smallpox, of course, in the schools, malnutrition. Children were running away from the schools and getting lost and dying from the elements, just trying to get home. Of course, there were beatings in the schools. The children suffered terribly by those. A lot of them died from the treatment they received in the schools. And the last school in Canada closed in Saskatchewan in 1996. So very recent. My own daughter in 1996, she was 6 years old. And I shudder to think if anybody ever came to take my daughter away, like how. So it wasn't just the kids who were being taken from these schools, but the devastation and all of the parents who were left behind in the villages. It was just catastrophic. I believe. I can't imagine anybody coming for my children. Next slide. Of course, the mandate of the Indian residential schools was literally to kill the Indian and the child. There were 130 schools across Canada. Over a third of Aboriginal children attended. The death rate was almost half. 48% of the children who went to these schools never made it home. Cultural genocide is a systematic destruction of tradition, values, language, and other elements which make one group of people distinct from other groups. So it was clearly genocidal acts, having our children taken away and put into residential schools. The Indian Act of Canada was formed in 1867. They defined the status of Indians as non-persons, and we were treated as such. We were treated like savages. we were unfit to govern our own affairs. We were wards of the state. We needed permission to leave the reserve. Of course, we weren't allowed to hunt and gather in our traditional ways. So we then became even more dependent on the government for rations and whatever they allowed into the reserves. So this, alongside of the Indian residential schools, was all really geared towards assimilation. It was a heavy, broad stroke to assimilate all Aboriginal people into the Christian society. In 1884, the founding Prime Minister of Canada, Sir John A. Macdonald, said, "We must by slow degree educate generation after generation until the nature of the animal is almost changed by the nature of its surroundings." So we weren't even considered human. Next slide. In 1907, there was one person who was trying to shed light on what was happening in the residential schools, Dr. Peter Bryce. He said, system-wide, 50% of the children who passed through these schools did not live to benefit from the education which they had received within. I know just last year, back east in Canada, there was acknowledgement to Dr. Peter Bryce. He was the only non-Aboriginal person who was trying to stand up and shed light onto what was really happening in these schools. He was let go immediately, and all of his reports were kind of brushed under the table until recently when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission began looking into the truth and the history of residential schools. In 1920, Dr. Campbell Scott, Deputy Superintendent of the Department of Indian Affairs, said, "I want to get rid of the Indian problem until there is not a single Indian in Canada that has not been absorbed into the body politic, and there is no Indian question and no Indian department." So their intentions were really clear and documented. A lot of the children were cut off from their families entirely. My father went to the St. Michael's Indian Residential School in Alert Bay for 11 years, rarely to go home. Some of the kids were there for the entire year. They wouldn't go home in the summer breaks or Christmas or Easter breaks. And my dad said he didn't get a single gift the entire time he went to school, not Christmas, not birthdays. And this was kind of the norm for a lot of the kids who went to the schools. They were just completely cut off from their families and the influences of traditions back home. Corporal punishment and sexual assault was rampant in almost all of the schools. You see a list there of some of the things that they did, the public strips, genital searches. Most of the children, when they went there, had their hair cut, which is a great spiritual and cultural, has cultural meaning to most First Nations people across Canada. Electric shocks, force feeding of their own vomit when they were sick. Of course, there were reports that came out of the nutrition experiments that were done on the kids in these schools. My father himself remembers being locked in, he said on the outside of the school they had a little chicken coop. It was about this high, maybe 5 feet long, and for a punishment for not listening, he was put in this cage. And the other students were forced to come and point and laugh at him specifically. He also, today my dad has 2 hearing aids. He's almost completely deaf without them. And he said from the very first day he got into the school, they would cuff him on the ears for not listening. That was what they said. But meanwhile, he only spoke Kwakwala and didn't understand English. So just for not understanding English, they cuffed him daily, and today he has these repercussions of being deaf. Next slide. The cumulative impact of residential schools is a legacy of unresolved trauma passed from generation to generation that has had a profound effect on the relationships between Aboriginal peoples and all Canadians. There are more and more researchers coming out on trauma. The latest one that I heard was that it becomes a part of the DNA, and that DNA is literally passed down giving birth to children. Next slide. One of the clear indicators of this intergenerational trauma is that there are more than 3 times the number of Aboriginal children that are placed in care today than in the height of the residential schools in Canada. So right now there are far more children who are in the care, in the system, being taken from their homes and their families still, than there were the amount of kids who went to residential schools. So it's still really affecting our people all across Canada. Next slide. My own story, my father went to residential school for 11 years. My mother went to residential school as well. And they both shared their stories with me and what happened to them in there. And I didn't know probably until maybe 10 years ago what really happened to them. I knew they were there. I knew they had to learn English. I knew they couldn't go home. But all of the other things that happened to them while they were in the schools, I had no clue. And growing up, like I said, I'm the youngest of 5. By the time I came along, both of my parents, shortly after I was born, became full-blown alcoholics. My older sister did most of everything that a mother should do. She bathed me, fed me, she got me to school. And then there were, the parties that happened in my home all of the time. My sister and I both suffered physical abuse, sexual abuse. Oftentimes we wouldn't have food at home. And I remember being really young and wondering why my mom never fought back. My dad used to beat her quite a bit when they drank. And I remember thinking, why doesn't she fight back? And my whole life I thought, I'm never going to be like that. I never, no man is ever going to treat me less than or superior than me. And because I had 3 older brothers too who taught me how to fight, I was like, I got this. And when I was 19, I had my first daughter, and she was lying in the bassinet beside my bed. I was in bed with her father. She was on this side of me. And I literally woke up one night. I mean, literally, it was an epiphany, and I looked at her and I thought, oh my God, despite all my years of growing up saying I'm never going to be like my mom, there I was, lying beside a man who treated me exactly the same way that my dad treated my mom. And I picked up my daughter and I told her, I said, this stops here. I'm going to show you a different way. And I knew then in my, in my soul that I needed to step out and reach out and find different people who could show me another way. Because I literally didn't know anything different other than what I grew up in. I literally didn't know how to be any other way. So I had to go out and learn. And I always say it's by the grace of God that there were people put in my life at that time who, I think because I was ready and I was asking for it and praying for it, people just started showing up. That's what it seems like to me. They would just start showing up. And were teaching me self-worth, teaching me how to empower myself, how to walk with my head high in dignity. And it's those kinds of people who helped me change, who helped me break that cycle. Today, my daughter is, she's 25 years old, and I still tell her, I spoke with her about 3 days ago, and I said, it's been really nice growing up with you, because everything that I've learned, I've done my best to actually speak to her about it. The things that I learned on how to be better, how to be stronger, how to have self-worth, and to walk in this world with our heads held high. I work really hard, and I know I'm really lucky that I've had my culture alongside with me my entire life. That's been my foundation of giving me the strength to carry on and do what I need to do. gives me that strength to step out of my comfort zone and to learn and to grow and to be stronger. And I know that I can example that to my children. So I encourage people to have empathy. When you see somebody who struggled the way I was, who didn't have the self-worth that I lived growing up, to show them dignity, to look at them as humans no matter what. And a smile and a hug and a how are you goes a really long way. So, my own journey into reconciliation, growing from the dysfunction that I was born into, I credit to the people who were around me, and I do my best today still to surround myself with people who lift me up. And so I encourage all of you to be the person who's going to make somebody's day better, or to make somebody feel like they matter or that they're even human, encouraging you to be that person. And I think that's one way that we can start moving reconciliation forward. Next slide. The time now, of course, is to move forward. Most of you are familiar with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the 94 recommendations that came out last year from that. And 2/3 of Canadians today believe that Canadians with no experience in the Indian residential school system have a role to play in reconciliation between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. And I think that comes from the realization that relationships really are a two-way street, that it's going to take Aboriginal people and non-Aboriginal people, literally and figuratively holding hands and moving forward as we embark on this journey of reconciliation. Next slide. And I'm going to show you a video. When I first started with Reconciliation Canada in 2012, the first circle that I put together, I called on elders, First Nations elders. We had Jewish, Chinese, Japanese, elders from the church, all to come together to start a conversation or the dialogue on what is reconciliation. So I'm going to show you a short video of the gathering that we had then, and then I'll speak more to it after that.
This is a historical moment for all of us. For being in this great house today, to gather your wisdom, to gather your strength, to gather your ideas about reconciliation. Reconciliation is recognizing that a harm was done, that taking young children from their homes generation after generation for over 100 years was wrong. Denying these children the ability to learn their languages was wrong. That treating them abusively was wrong.
In our naivety, in our stupidity, in our arrogance, we have made many mistakes.
There's far too much hurt and pain and loss in our community, far too many kids. This is a historical moment for all of us. For being in this great house today, to gather your wisdom, to gather your strength, to gather your ideas about reconciliation. Reconciliation is recognizing that a harm was done, that taking young children from their homes generation after generation for over 100 years was wrong. Denying these children the ability to learn their languages was wrong. That treating them abusively was wrong.
In our naivety, in our stupidity, in our arrogance, we have made many mistakes.
There's far too much hurt and pain and loss in our community, far too many kids taking their lives. Far too much poverty and despair.
As a survivor of the Holocaust, I feel that it's very, very important that we leave a legacy, that we inoculate people against hatred and discrimination.
Must stop is healing a wound or healing a hurt or healing something that happened. Must stop.
I would like to see this huge injustice brought to light. Reconciliation for Aboriginal peoples must be done well.
It means that we have to acknowledge our history together, that indeed these harms were inflicted upon the First Nations people of this country.
What our complicity in all of that was. I don't know how we can go forward together without those kinds of acknowledgements.
Moving forward means to live a good life. Long time ago, our people lived a good life. Every day was a good day.
We cheat ourselves out of a full, rich life if we're not willing to take the risks of reconciliation.
Well, first of all, I think we really need to get the message out.
We're calling on all Canadians across the spectrum of our society to become engaged, because it's necessary for them to validate our experience and for them to embrace the notion that we can vision a future together as a society, Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal.
Because the past repeats itself, we can try to change it. We don't want that to happen again.
In September of 2013, we're going to have a huge gathering in Vancouver to talk about reconciliation and to celebrate the idea of reconciliation.
Become informed and to reflect and to help make decisions about what is proper redress.
Another word for reconciliation is courage.
Ashquanixtua means to hold each other's hands, and in holding each other's hands, there is no room for harm.
It's up to all of us now to put some justice in all of us, to put some love, to some care.
And forget that dark past that each of us faced.
The ultimate goal and objective of reconciliation is to find nakalkala, peace within.
So, I think the biggest question when we begin to have conversation or dialogues about reconciliation is, first of all, what does it mean and how do we do that? Beginning the conversation, I think, is the first step, because it isn't an everyday conversation, oh, how are you doing? What do you think about reconciliation? It's not normal, and I think the only way that we can change that is to be courageous and to start the conversation, to ask questions. What does reconciliation mean to you? And of course, what does reconciliation mean for yourself? In the video, my dad at the very end, he says, ultimately the goal is to find na kalkala, which means peace within. So every person who is on a journey of reconciliation is going to need something else, something different than the person beside them to find that peace within. So reconciliation is going to mean something different to every individual. The youth in there is actually my daughter. She said that another word for reconciliation is courage. And I think it does take great courage for people to step into this journey of reconciliation. And I keep saying it's a journey because I don't think there will ever be a definitive, oh, I'm reconciled, I'm good, I'm going to move on, because life keeps happening, changes keep happening. I think we will forever be on this path of reconciliation, and we need to work at it on a daily basis and stay courageous and stay in that place of having the hard conversations about what do I need to feel reconciled and what do you need to feel reconciled and how can we help each other, I think is the main thing that's really going to keep it moving, is that we know that we're all in this together and that we are all one, and that's how we're going to make this a strong movement moving forward. Next slide. When I have our dialogue workshops, I'm going to ask all of you to, if you can, grab a pen right now, and I really want you to write down your answers to these two questions. What does reconciliation mean to me? So you can take a minute to write down your answer of what does reconciliation mean to me? And the second question, why is reconciliation meaningful to me? And I know for a lot of people that this is probably the first time you've actually consciously thought about what does reconciliation mean to me. And I just want to say that whatever it is that you wrote down is true. That's going to be true for you, and I want you to hold steadfast to that and start having the conversations and share your ideas of what reconciliation means to you and why is it meaningful to you in your world, in your family life, your community, where you work, that you start having these conversations and be the leader in reconciliation, be the leader in having those dialogues, and to stay courageous. When we sat with the elders to make that video that we showed a few minutes ago, most of the ancient cultures from around the world, there wasn't a word for reconciliation, but rather, and I know specifically for First Nations people, we had ceremonies that spoke to finding the peace within. Like we had ceremonies for coming of age, letting go of being a child, and how do you transition into being an adult, and doing that in a healthy way without feeling conflicted or being stuck, but that it helped you move forward and to be okay with where you are in each day. We had ceremonies around death to help with the grieving, to help letting go, and how you're going to move forward without that person physically in your life anymore. And all of the ancient cultures and traditions around the world had ceremonies and stories and legends that spoke to the same things as Aboriginal people. So I think the biggest thing that we found in that gathering of the elders, when we're talking about reconciliation, that it really kind of boils down to the morals and values of human beings around the world, and we need to bring those things back for us to sit across the table from somebody and see a human being and not the CEO of something or the financial planner of this business or that business, but to remember that we're each human beings sitting in a room, whether there's a table between you or you're in a circle or you're walking down the street, but to remember that everybody is human, that everybody has a story, and to be mindful of that. We get so caught up in materialism and the corporateness of our worlds that we have these silos that we're not even aware of. We all live in these silos that we're not aware of. And colonization and everything that's happened in Canada was imposed from the top down. And we at Reconciliation Canada believe that we're going to change that. Only it's going to happen from us down here, all the people down here below these silos that were kind of forced on us, whether we knew about it or conscious of it or not. That when we start having these conversations about reconciliation, conversations sharing our personal stories, that we can humanize our world again, and we're going to grow that up until they're going to hear us up here, in a really meaningful way. I'm really hopeful today because, of course, we have Prime Minister Trudeau. He has verbally said he was going to instate the 94 recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He's already began, there's the motion of the pre-inquiry for the inquiry into the murdered and missing Indigenous women of Canada. And that gives me so much hope. I think, personally for myself, because I've been so involved with doing everything I can to help and heal myself, that I want to help and heal all of our people and all of Canada. I think we're going to do that once we really grasp the idea of equality. When we bring back the complementary roles that males and females had before this colonial mind of this male-dominant world that we live in right now. I think when we begin to empower our women and create these complementary roles, that's all speaks to reconciliation as well. I think everything that's going to come out of the inquiry for the murdered and missing women really speaks to reconciliation, that it's imperative that we every day with every person lift one another up, to give people dignity on a daily basis, to lift them up, to empower them. Then we're going to lift all of us up all together, and that's really what reconciliation is when we begin to humanize our world, take out the corporate and the materialism. And that's what true reconciliation is going to do. As for the 94 recommendations, it's going to help tremendously. The government is going to see us as human beings and not our status numbers that we carry on our status cards. I think that's what those recommendations really speak to, is humanizing us, and the equality that I spoke of, and lifting our people up. But what's really important, and I think how everybody listening today can contribute, is to begin to see the human beings around you and not our titles, our labels, the colors of our skin, where we live, how much money we make, but the human being that's in your world right now and how you can lift them up and give them a sense of human dignity. And that's what I encourage everybody listening. It can be in employment, specifically what we're talking about is the employment here in British Columbia. It's still the same regardless, that we humanize everybody that comes into our offices, into our workplaces, and treat them with dignity, no matter who they are or where they come from. And keeping in mind the history, do some research into intergenerational trauma and how that affects human beings. And even though I didn't go to residential school, I was so profoundly affected by it. And I've been blessed to have people to help me grow from that. And I know I've been blessed. And asking you to be a blessing to somebody else. Taking action towards reconciliation is a lot of, what I said, just humanize everybody around you. Take the time to listen to some of these stories. As a Canadian, what can you do? People ask me all the time, write a letter to your MP on how you support some of the 94 recommendations that came out. They affect everybody. There's education, employment, all of these things that can be done. If you familiarize yourself with the 94 recommendations, there's something you can do, whether it's supporting local First Nations or the churches or the schools in bringing up the awareness of the recommendations and how we can all contribute to. I know a lot of them say call on the federal government or those governments to do that, but I think if we all start writing letters and being vocal about what those 94 recommendations are and what that could mean to Aboriginal people around Canada, like I said, the more voices we have all together, the more powerful we're going to grow as a nation. If anybody has any questions for me, I have our website up on the slide there. We have great resources. There's tools for how to begin a kitchen table dialogue. There's a toolkit for universities, offices, and how you can implement your own dialogues around reconciliation. We also have requests. There's a Dropbox somewhere for requesting speakers or lunch and learns, dialogue workshops. We have all kinds of videos and resources and things that you can access to get more information about reconciliation.
I think we'll leave the questions until maybe until at the end of the session. Thank you so much. That was that was so inspiring, and I can feel the courage in this room. Thank you very much. And I'm going to now, Moon will be introducing Paulette. Moon?
Hi there, Paulette Seymour, Director of Employment Services at Access. Paulette was raised in the Kootenays of BC, and her people are the Mohawks of the Akwesasne in southern Ontario. Her goals in career demonstrate a commitment to Aboriginal community development and improving the quality of life for Aboriginal people. She has been working with the Aboriginal Community Career Employment Services Society for 9 years, first managing the Employment Assistance Office in the downtown east side, then as a provincial administrator of Access's Blade Runners program, and recently assumed the position of Director of Employment Services. Prior to Access, her work history has included community development, business development, and especially employment, human resource development. Over the years, she has worked with Aboriginal community-based organizations, government agencies like Service Canada and ADNAC, and private sector companies such as BC Tel, BC Hydro, and CIBC. Her skills include employment counseling, group facilitation, program management, administrative management, and strategic planning. She maintains that she is especially motivated by work that promotes the potential of Aboriginal people to participate fully in the benefit of today's labor market. Paulette?
Thank you. Akwesasne, that's the reserve near Cornwall, Ontario. That's where my father comes from. And how did it come to be out west is an adventure, but it brings me a close tie to the Coast Salish, that he was invited out to play lacrosse, and he was quite a lacrosse player. He came out and played with the North Shore Indians with the likes of Simon Baker, Clarence Joe, Frank Baker, and never went home. He looked for work in the city and couldn't find any. He looked for work in the province and couldn't find any. He wrote a letter to all the lacrosse leagues in the province and received a favorable response from Trail in the Kootenays, where Kaminka was booming, and settled there. Raised a family. I have 6 older brothers and 1 younger sister. His story is unique in that it's very different from Shelley's. I was raised off reserve, and to my benefit, that meant that I got a really solid education. Of my brothers, 4 of them are engineers. 1 has a degree in economics and a degree in law. The other is doing well with a couple of post-secondary years of civil engineering as well. I certainly keep myself fed, and my sister is surviving independently as well. However, I don't speak my language. I know some good swear words. Sego is hello, so I also know some greetings. And I never met my grandmother until I was 10 years old. I never saw the reserve until I was 10 years old. Since then, we visit regularly. My siblings are in the east and close to the reserve. And I never knew a grandfather. But I also honor the ancestry I have through my mother as a member of the Toscano of Italy. And so I give credit to both my heritages. I want to talk today initially about Aboriginal people and how we come to be as a unique society, especially in Canada. And I'm going to describe it in a way that my mother described it to me as a child. So in very layman's language, she said that when Canada wanted to confederate and create a country, they wanted all the Aboriginal people to be part of it. So they asked them if they would agree to the laws. No raping, no pillaging, no killing, no stealing, all the basic rules that Aboriginal people would live by anyways. And Aboriginal people said, sure, we could agree to that on some conditions. And this is where we come to the birth of Aboriginal rights. They said, first of all, we see that you've set up camp here, and now it's Vancouver, but you've set up camp. We want to be sure that you set aside some land for us. And they said, of course, we'll reserve some land for the Aboriginal people. We also want to be sure that we still have the right to hunt and fish and gather. And they said, absolutely. And Aboriginal people said, for so long as the rivers flow and the sun rises. And they said, of course. They said also that we want the right to health care. You've come to our land here and you've brought some diseases that our medicine people cannot cure, have never experienced before, and they're killing our people. We have smallpox and tuberculosis. We need your doctors to cure your diseases. And they said, we'll look after it. They also said, now you give us these treaties to read and discuss and to sign. We don't know this written language. Our history is a tradition of oral history, oral language. And so we ask that you teach us this reading, this writing, this English. And along came education. Those are the four pillars that base Aboriginal rights on. And they are elements, the key elements of the Indian Act. So along with Confederation came the Indian Act. It's a law that governs all Aboriginal people. In Canada, we don't have a Jewish Act. We don't have a Chinese Act. We don't have a German Act, but we have an Indian Act. And the first part of the Indian Act is to decide who is included, who it addresses, and who it doesn't. So they went out and they crossed the lands and they counted the Indians and they gave them numbers. We continue to hold these numbers. We continue to be registered. Those are the registered Indians. Those are the status Indians. And I often joke that they've tattooed it in my inside lip. And that's not true. But we do carry a card. Much like a social insurance number, we have a status Indian card, status Indian number. And I use the term Indian because that's the name of the law. The act is called the Indian Act. Those are the registered status First Nations people of this country. So what happened to the ones that were out fishing or hunting or traveling or going to a new territory, exploring, when they were counting? They didn't get counted. Those are non-status. Those are the ones that were not included and continue to also breed non-status Indians. We also get non-status Indians through other avenues, through marriage. Part of the Indian Act said that if a woman married a non-Aboriginal man, that's it. Removal of that status card, removal of that number. And in fact, in the day when I met my husband, because he was non-status, I did not marry him for 10 years until I was sure that that Bill C-31 entrenched my right to marry a non-status Indian or a non-Indian and retain my status. As of 1985 or 86, that's in place. So we have status and non-status. Status Indians have a land base and are commonly referred to as First Nations. Non-status have Aboriginal ancestry but are not registered. We come to Métis. Métis did not fall under the Indian Act. Métis originated with an ancestry of French, and Aboriginal together. Today, there are the ancestors or the descendants of those original crossbred people, and they continue to grow as a population, and a unique population, unique by their culture, by their traditions, by their customs, and by their ancestry and experience. We also see them Métis recognized when our Constitution was patriated in 1981. And then we have the Inuit people. And those are the people of the far north, the Yukon and the Northwest Territories. They are governed under the Indian Act, and yet very distinct mention in the Indian Act, and very distinctly mentioned in our Constitution as well. So when we talk about Aboriginal, we use the terminology Aboriginal to encompass all Indigenous people of Canada. First Nations have a land base and our status. Non-status have an origin of French and Aboriginal ancestry. Métis, I'm sorry, non-status have Aboriginal ancestry but are not registered. Métis have a French and Aboriginal ancestry. And then the people of the north. Now, as an Aboriginal organization, we are specializing in Aboriginal service to Aboriginal people. So how do we determine who's who? The question that we ask clients, and that we must ask, is, do you identify as an Aboriginal? And whatever the answer is the right answer. We are not here as gods or as authorities to decide who is and who is not. All the programs and services under employment do not ask for a status card or a registered number. If we do it for statistical purposes. And we always leave the ancestry up to the client. As you know, my background is in employment and training for Aboriginal people, so I'm always going to be speaking from that perspective. So we can go to the next thing we talk about are barriers to employment, and we can display the whole list. So you've heard from Shelley that through reconciliation we have a history of pain, of oppression, of marginalization, of suffering. And you've also heard that I talked about the reserves, where Aboriginal people were given land, but it's land even today that is of poor quality, of some inhabitable existences, poor water, poor power, poor housing, and especially low to no economic development. You'll find more prosperous reserves that are closer to urban centers. Vancouver has a lot surrounding, Kamloops as well. Major urban centers in British Columbia have more prosperous, industrious reserves, but you'll still see poor economic development there. So we see economic downturns, lack of education, lack of skills, lack of experience, less seniority. Why is that important? Less seniority. If you're the last to be hired, you're the first to be let go in economic downturns. Transportation. Some of the reserves are quite rural and isolated. Low job search skills. We don't have a history of long-term employment, and in fact we have multiple generations of social assistance recipients. For example, I've experienced a client that came in to me and said, "Oh, I don't have to come to my appointments anymore." I asked why, and she says, "Well, because I get my own checks now. I'm 18. That's the multi-generational effects of social assistance on reserve. Lack of work clothes and work gear, and employment prejudices, and we still see that out there. When my father landed the job in Trail, they said, "Yeah, we'll give you this job so you can play lacrosse, but I bet you anything that within a year you'll be out on Skid Row." To prove them wrong, he spent 37 years in Cominco at a factory, at a smelter, lead and zinc smelter, and never took a sick day. He just found it, he could not. I realize now, after his passing, that his whole objective in life was to prove the non-Aboriginal wrong about the biases and discriminations against Aboriginal people. And to my benefit, you know, the next generation that he produced is prospering, right? But you look at some of the statistics. The highest rate of high school incompletes in Canada-wide. Canada-wide, less than, 48% of Aboriginal people have less than high school graduation certificates. And in fact, Canada-wide, 9.9% have only a graduation certificate. Overall, working age population lags behind the education attainment of non-Aboriginal people, with 29% having less than high school compared with 12% for non-Aboriginals. This is in British Columbia alone, of the same age. The gap between the two populations has narrowed since between 2006 and 2011. However, it's only gone from 19 to 17%. So that's not really a narrowing. The unemployment rate in Vancouver for non-Aboriginals is 5.7%. For Aboriginal people, it's 12.5%. BC-wide, non-Aboriginal unemployment rate is 6.7%. The unemployment rate in Vancouver, as I said, for Aboriginal people is 12.5%. And for youth, it's 17.5%. And that's in Greater Vancouver. The Government of Canada doesn't gather unemployment statistics on First Nation reserves because it says it's too costly and it's hard to find people to interview. That means roughly half of the country's First Nations people don't show up in the unemployment numbers. As a result, Canada knows very little about unemployment in areas where it has made job training and economic development a priority. So as much as they don't know the issues, they know they exist. I mean, they don't know the details of the issues. They know there's high unemployment. They know there's low economic development. They still provide the employment and training, but they don't know the details. And actually, the reason that we don't get a good census survey of the reserves is that Aboriginal people are hesitant to complete those surveys. Number one, because funding on reserve is per capita. And if they're coming and going from the reserve and they start saying, well, I spend more time off the reserve, then it damages their community financially. Number two, Aboriginal people have been surveyed, studied, counted, recounted so many times, it's exhausting. It's through the Indian Act that we became objects, wards of the state, as Shelley said. And I continue, as a status Indian, we are still wards of the state. And that's challenging, you know. That's meaning that we are chattel. We are things to this country. And that wears on a person. It wears on a human's perception of themselves and on their dignity and on their ability to promote themselves for success. How can I go into a job interview and say, I can do everything for you, when I'm kind of marginalized and I know that's where I come from? In 2011, in the construction industry, Aboriginal employment fell by 16%, or 4,000 jobs, while it decreased in the non-Aboriginal community by only 5%, or 45,000 jobs. So even in tough times, Aboriginal people face the highest effect. 46% of Aboriginal individuals are under the age of 25. This is another interesting thing, is that our population, both Canada-wide, BC-wide, and Vancouver-wide, is a young population. We have a baby boom that happened about 2 or 3 decades after general mainstream baby boom. And that means we are an untapped population that are growing and growing soon. And we're at our population, that's that's almost half of our population are under the age of 25. Almost half, 46%. I want to move on to some of the other issues that Aboriginal people face. So we know that the Indian Act puts us as an object. The other discriminations and oppressions start to affect us, and we start to lower our expectation of ourselves, start to feel oppressed, start to feel not worth much, can't even talk because we've been told not to speak our language. And my father never taught me my language for fear that it would be detrimental to my success. So I never learned the words. He would speak them, and I would say, "What is that? No, don't worry about it, never mind." Right? In Vancouver, they say that, and Census Canada will attest to this too, that the postal code V6A, which is the downtown east side, is the poorest postal code in all of Canada. 1/3 of the homeless people in the downtown east side are Aboriginal people. They only make up 5% of BC's population. They only make up 5.6% of Vancouver's population. And yet they're 33% of the homeless. So my next slide looks at the diversity of Aboriginal people. So we know that there's diversity in who's status, who's not, who's Métis, who's Inuit, who's on reserve, who's off reserve. And that tends to kind of also affect us on an internal basis too. So long as non-Aboriginal people say, "You're an Aboriginal, you're not so good. You're an Aboriginal, you're not equal to me," that gets passed on. It's called the internalization of oppression. And so somebody turns to me and says, "Oh, you're only a half-breed. You're not a real Indian." My people are Mohawks, very proud nation, called Garters of the East Door, and a matriarchal society. And so it's the clan mothers that nominate for the chief. We follow a mainstream democratic process of voting for the chief. However, we are integrating our own traditions and customs. It's a matriarchal society, so the clan mothers make the nominations. Now, my mother is of Italian descent, so I have people from my nation who refer to me as not even Indian because my mother's Italian, because I don't have a clan mother, because I don't have a mother that's Aboriginal. That's internalization of oppression. I remember when I first started a job that was Aboriginal specific, it was a clerk, and they said, "Well, you don't look Aboriginal." And I said, "Well, that's because I take after my mother. There's a little bit of Italian, and all that." I made excuses for it. For 10 years, I made excuses until I finally thought, this is not right. And I said, I changed my answer because they still said, "Well, you don't look Native. You don't look Aboriginal." And I said, "Well, what does a Native look like? What does an Aboriginal look like?" And that was at least the conversation stopper and made them think. But after about 10 years of that, I said, that's not right either, because it really puts the power in the questioner to determine what does an Indian look like or what does an Aboriginal look like. So now I have a different answer yet. After 10 years of that, they say to me, and they still say, "Well, you don't look First Nations. You don't look really totally First Nations. What kind of an Indian are you?" Which is so discriminating. I want to say, what kind of a white person are you? But my answer to, "Well, you don't look First Nations," I say, "Yes, I do, because I am First Nations. I identify as a First Nation. And I define what a First Nations look like. It looks like that, it looks like that, it looks like that, and it looks like this." So I guess my lesson there is be sure not to question those things. People self-identify. You can see from the map that there is diversity in our culture. There are 7 linguistic groups, major linguistic groups in British Columbia alone. There are 39 different languages spoken in British Columbia, and dialects of that as well. These are not homogenous people, you know. The people of the West Coast are the people of the ocean, are the people of the fishermen, are the people of the interior, are more the people of the teepee, or more of the people of the land-based, the hunting and gathering. Yeah, there was trading, but there's diversity through this province like no other province. And you say, well, why here and not so much in the prairies? Well, the prairies is a little bit easier to travel. It's nice and flat and easy to get across. It might take you a while, but to climb those mountains was really challenging. And we do have some traditional paths. There was the Grease Trail, there's trading routes, and those still exist. We wouldn't ever, just final note, we wouldn't ever lump all Europeans together and say, what language do you speak? And so we must be sure to recognize that we are in the land of the Coast Salish, and I honor the opportunity to speak on the territory and recognize that that's where we are. I'd like to now turn to some other resources that we have for Aboriginal people. They're called friendship centers in British Columbia. 78% of BC's Aboriginal population live, study, work in urban areas. So, as I said before, there's not a lot of economic development on some of our reserves, and most of our reserves. Funded by the BC First Nations Citizens Fund and funded by the federal government and the National Association of Friendship Centers, they provide a whole series of programs, and it varies from community to community. The First Nations Fund provides friendship centers funding for a director, funding for student bursaries, programs or funding for elders transportation. The First Citizens Fund Student Bursary Program provides funding to students of Aboriginal ancestry to help support their post-secondary education. It's funded by the provincial government of BC and delivered by the Association of the BC Association of Aboriginal Friendship Centers. That's out of Victoria. The National Association of Friendship Centers and the federal government request proposals for various initiatives that the Friendship Centers always ask for in order to continue their work. I've given a list of the friendship centers, and there's 25 of them, and there's so many it didn't fit on one slide. So I put in larger print the website where you can go and get their not only their phone numbers, addresses, and contact information, but links right to their websites. They range from Victoria to Port Hardy, from Vancouver to Fort St. John, from Penticton to Prince Rupert, even Fort Nelson, way on up there, has a friendship center. Generally speaking, friendship centers facilitate, go to the next slide, friendship centers facilitate the transition of Aboriginal people from rural, remote, and reserve life to the urban environment. For many, they're the first point of contact to obtain referrals to culturally based socioeconomic programs and services. This is kind of like a friend in a heart or a land that's full of non-Aboriginal people, people that are foreign maybe to someone who's new to Vancouver, knows no one and knows nothing. And let me tell you, Vancouver is populated by Aboriginal people not only from all over BC, but all over Canada, and in fact all over North America. So for them, if they're new to Vancouver, a friendship center is a place to start. For many, they're the first point of contact to obtain referrals to culturally based socioeconomic programs and services. So I want to take a little moment to step back to the Indian Act. You notice that I never mentioned anything about employment in the Indian Act because it included health, it included education, it also included reserves with infrastructure. That's housing, land, etc. But there's no accommodation for Aboriginal employment and training, or employment training in the Indian Act. As such, it's an afterthought. It's only come into life probably in the last half of that last century, so in the 60s, in the early 60s. Typically, the mission is for Aboriginal Friendship Centers, typically a mission is to improve the quality of life for Aboriginal people in the urban environment by supporting self-determined activities which encourage equal access and participation in Canadian society. So it's, in other words, activities and initiatives that help people survive in an urban setting. It pays good respect and strength to increasing the emphasis on Aboriginal cultural distinctiveness. So you'll find activities and initiatives that include housing programs and shelters, transitional housing referrals. It'll include sports, recreational activities, soccer, lacrosse, basketball, usually a gym in the friendship centers, cultural initiatives and events such as like Christmas party. The Vancouver Aboriginal Friendship Center hosts a wonderful children's Christmas party every year. Powwow night is every Wednesday or Thursday, and then West Coast night is every Wednesday. And that's typical of a friendship center, to host some of these cultural and traditional events, to ensure that we hang on to our identity and our traditions. It also hosts elders activities, youth activities, women's services. At the Vancouver Friendship Center, we have kitchen where the elders make lunch every day for the elders group, where they hold bingo on Wednesday with the lunch. And it keeps our elder community together and connected and active. Educational programs. Alternative schools are working out of friendship centers. And in Vancouver, I don't know that so many friendship centers throughout the province have, but we have a daycare. And it's been running for 31 years. So that's Aboriginal people looking after Aboriginal children. That's exciting. So that's your friendship centers, and I encourage you to go visit the BC Association of Friendship Center site and link to all the other friendship centers for other resources if you're watching this webinar from other communities outside of Vancouver. I want to talk about assets. Christine asked me to speak about this, and I don't even know what the community out there knows about assets, so I'm going to start at the very beginning. So we look at the history. Well, it actually begins way back when the Unemployment Insurance Act was established, or Employment Insurance Act was established. Now that was the federal government said for somebody who loses their job, they can get some benefits to survive them until they get a new job. Now, in order to protect that fund of money that the federal government was establishing, they said, gee, we can't have individuals living on on income assistance, on unemployment insurance benefits for years, or for a year, or for any extended period of time. We need them to get back to work pretty quick. So let's put in together employment programs. And they did that for the general population. Those became manpower centers. Some of the people of my age might remember manpower centers, and they actually had employment counselors, right? And so you go to those, and you could get some support or referrals to training that might get you a job quicker than just waiting around or doing your own job search. And lo and behold, the Aboriginal people said, look, we face the highest unemployment rates, the poorest trained, the least work experience. You need to set aside some funding for Aboriginal people. They called it the native allocation, because that was the terminology of the day. And they did. They set aside some funds. As time went on, you come into the late 60s, they said, you know, you guys are doling out this funding for Aboriginal people, but you're doing it on your own, like a very paternalistic, you know, almost the Indian agent style of looking after us. Again, you know, that we're kids. You need to incorporate an Aboriginal perspective on it. And so they established advisory councils, district advisory boards. And from that came another movement that happened in the mid-90s, where they established a national federal strategy called the Aboriginal Human Resource Development Strategy, which actually said, was of the premise that Aboriginal people can control Aboriginal employment and training. And it provided allocations to what were those district advisory boards became organizations. Those district advisory boards was originally set up as a geographic area serving First Nations. So along came this strategy. We called it the ARDA, and there were ARDA holders or agreement holders, ARDA agreement holders, Aboriginal Human Resource Development agreement holders. And they delivered employment and training. Along came a new government called the Conservative government with Mr. Harper, And he said, we want to write our own strategy. And they wrote the Aboriginal Skills and Employment Training Strategy. And that's where we are today. In 2010, they introduced the Aboriginal Skills and Employment Training Strategy. What's the difference? The difference is that they put some strings attached to it. So in the ARDA agreement, we had autonomy on how we were to spend the money, so long as it was focused at employment and training and increasing Aboriginal people's participation in the labor market. In other words, where Aboriginal people got to enjoy the benefits and wealth of today's economy, as opposed to being always underfoot. The strings they attached is, first of all, that we had to be accountable. So, okay, fair enough. We'll account for how we spend it and that it's in line with the intentions of the funding and the strategy. Number two, that it had to include partners. So we had to seek out partnership through industry to help pay for the employment opportunities and the employment training opportunities that we wanted to create. And number three, it had to be labor market driven. So it had to be not necessarily for occupations that we wanted, but occupations that would lead to employment. All of this is reasonable and doable. And so we've been working hard since 2010 on that strategy. It concluded March 31st of 2015, but we have been extended for a year and extended again. So we now know that we have funding at least until March 31st of 2017. But without that continual or multi-year funding, it really does cramp our style, because we have courses or programs, training programs, that cross funding or fiscal years, and we can't engage in that because we have no promise of a strategy or of a funding beyond that. We have a new government, so we continue to operate successfully with the hopes of a new strategy authored by this new Liberal government. Let's look at what kinds of things are covered in the ASET strategy. Programs and services. So first of all, the intention is to increase Aboriginal people's participation in the labor market, to see Aboriginal people get jobs, to see them taking advantage of the opportunities, enjoying the prosperity of our labor market. To a better situation, or to as close as we can get to the non-Aboriginal enjoyment of it. Work-related certificate funding and sponsorship. So it provides us funding to actually go out and get somebody a first aid ticket or a WIMIS certificate or a serving it right or a food safe certificate, so they can work in a restaurant or work in those industries that require those certificates. Further than that, we actually have the capability of providing funding to buy work gear. Right here in downtown Vancouver, the construction industry is really booming. We have a build like no other, and part of it is because our mild winter has allowed them to continue to work all winter long. We don't have snow here this year at all. And so we have lots of opportunity in construction. And that means that they need work boots, they need hard hats, they need high visibility vests, and we have the ability to provide those kinds of things to secure a job. So always there's that attachment to the employment, to the securing of a job. We also, and this is where we come to the meat of our program, have the ability to fund individual seats. That's where we actually purchase a seat, say at Vancouver Community College, to go become a cook, to go become a counselor, to go become a business administration office employee. And we can pay for not only tuition, books, and supplies, we can support the client, the trainee, the Aboriginal student through some living allowance. We also do group programs. So where we see, and I'm talking mostly of Access, that's where I work, the Aboriginal Community Career and Employment Service Society. And we are a unique asset holder in that all the other asset holders were set up based on a geographic area. But in their wisdom, the federal government said, gee, a lot of Aboriginal people are migrating to urban centers. And they set up 3 urban Aboriginal asset holders, one in Toronto, one in Winnipeg, and one here in Vancouver. And that's what Access is. It's the urban population that are our clients. We also provide group programming. So we look at other organizations that can do a better job of, say, pre-employment training. We look to Helping Spirit Lodge, or working with people who are attached to the criminal justice system. Circle of Eagles works with Aboriginal people that way. We look to community partnership funding, where an organization can support and provide their own space and contribute to the funding. And we also, as I said, are focused on labor market demand and are driven by that. And finally, my last point is an application process. This is where we uphold that accountability. But the application process means that a client has to complete documentation and paperwork in order to be eligible for this funding, in order to be accountable for it, and in order for it to be successful. So I have to say that this all looks really great, doesn't it? But the reality is that we have not had a budget increase since we started as an ARDA, and that was back in 2003. So we have been living on that same pot of money, the same amount every year, ever since. And this year I ran out of funding for individual seat purchases the second week of September. We get our funding April 1st, and it lasted not even a full 6 months. So there's the joys of it and then the limitations of it. And that completes my story on assets. You can see my last slide is the asset locations. Their names are quite lengthy, so I left acronyms. And you can see that I've left you the website so that you can go and visit their locations, specifically if you're working in their area. Where assets are a real asset to WorkBC offices is that we can partner together and stretch our funding and stretch your abilities as well. So we look favorably to working with WorkBC sites to ensure that Aboriginal people get a fair shake in the labor market. Thank you.
Next, Gudad, Tracy, and I will be telling our personal stories. The purpose of these stories are to provide a background of cultural knowledge, personal success stories, and case managing. Hi, my name is Min Pellet. I hold 2 traditional names. Adamton is from the Hoytston community, the Statland territory, and I carry the name Shmokwimia, which originated with the Cowichan people. I gained both traditional names through the Longhouse ceremony when I became a winter dancer in 2001. I reside in the Statland territory, which is Interior Salish, but I was raised with the Squamish Nation traditions, which is Coast Salish. I have 14 years experience in life skills coaching, counseling, and in the following areas: family and youth, addictions, substance misuse, sexual abuse and trauma, and 2 years as an employment advisor with WorkBC Open Door Group in Lillooet. I'm also very proficient in business communications. Throughout my work history, I've worked with 90% Aboriginal clients. I'm a product of an attempt to bring culture to urban Aboriginals as I attended an all-native school in Vancouver called Spirit Rising. I was introduced to many different areas of culture, and this is where I was introduced at the age of 12 to powwow dancing, the big drum, regalia making, swats, potlucks, beading, and other cultural activities. These connections in my early years have left lasting impressions and have played a role in who I am today. I was educated with a regular curriculum but had teachers that were more traditional. I'm also proud to say that I'm a product of the Vancouver Friendship Centre, as this is where we gathered. This is the place that gave my mother the concepts of being Native, as she did not know much about traditions of the Statland territory. My mother fell ill a few years ago, and I was next in line to my mother as we have a strong matriarch family. I am the speaker, the go-to person, the decision maker, and the connection to all family lines, whether at a band level, family level, and more so the financial level. I work full-time with I worked full-time at the Lillooet Friendship Centre. My older sister does not work, but did not leave her residence in Vancouver due to finances. My younger sister, a full-time employee with no benefits, no sick leave, no leave with pay. This represents most employment in Lillooet. I am the middle child, but by my mother's wishes, I am the one that holds the responsibility for my family. During the onset of my mom's illness and the next 18 days that I was off work in the hospital room with my mom, it was natural that I remained at her side. As a woman who provided for her family and who held together, she had pride and did not allow others to wash, feed, or help her, and as her daughter, that was my duty. My mother passed away. In my life, I've overcome addictions, physical, mental, sexual abuse, and the loss of a child as he was kidnapped at the age of 1.5, and I didn't find him until he was 17 years old. I developed anxiety, mental health issues, difficulties coping, but I've gained skills and knowledge to overcome some of those barriers. Today, I'm 21 years clean and sober and very proud of it. Some of the impacts of residential school and employment in my life is, I'd like to acknowledge that my mother was a residential school survivor who never shared her experience with me. I think it was fear-based. I don't think she wanted me to see her as a victim. She was very strong-willed, but also hurt, angry, sad, and experienced mental health issues. She carried her story to her dying day. She never released it and never talked about her pain. The gift I got from that horrible experience is that I can make choices and I can move forward while I acknowledge the past. I'm going to talk now about some of the best practices while working with clients. Always have patience and understanding. Letting clients fully understand my job and all the tools that I have to assist them in making choices for the future. When meeting with my clients, I engage in the conversation, explain the ICM process and the importance of why we have progress notes. I let them know that it's about accountability and honesty and helps us to move forward while staying on track. All the tools we have are documents that keep integrity intact. ICM keeps me accountable to my clients, and I love the program for that reason. Some of my clients trust the process and some don't. Some clients have never had the choice to use their voice, and this is a new and uncomfortable process for them. And at times, clients may seem disengaged, but really it comes down to knowing your client's history and what they perceive things to be. Have they had things or processes done to them or with them? I encourage my clients by sharing every step with them. I start by turning my monitor towards them so they could see the process, which is the action plan, being created in front of them. Seeing their own words and their own choices in front of them encourages empowerment. I explain every form and the purpose behind them. I let my clients know that this is their space, their creative zone, and it isn't about me. Some of the employment tools, I fully understand the tools that are needed within the employment program and explain the benefits of the tools with my clients. For example, when I do the multidimensional needs assessment, the MDNA, I utilize the wheel and explain why I'm asking the questions I do, making sure it is all related to employment. I explain the reference graph in its 3 stages, starting with employment, life, and personal. I speak about the wheel as a guide to understand their history better. Parts of the wheel asks about addictions, mental health. I explain it is not to judge, it is so that I know how to help you maintain and retain employment. I also ask if there's anything else that I need to know about you that would possibly interfere with education or employment. What I want from my clients is what makes them most happy. When working with clients, regardless of age, I ask them what they want to be when they grow up or what they dreamed of doing. I explain the only barrier they have is themselves. I had one client who only ever had been employed as a cook, and he didn't even like cooking. At 67, he wanted to be an architect. I encouraged doing so. I often tell my clients that I'm doing what I was meant to do. I say, can you imagine that people actually pay me to come here every day and call it work? It's my second home and a gift. My goal is to help my clients find that gift as well. While working with clients that are BCEA employment obligated, I've recognized a few traits. Mainly they're in fear. They know that this meeting is a make or break of their day. Our appointments have a direct result on whether they'll be able to pay their rent, have food, pay their hydro. So what they do and how they show up is about performing to be able to get through the appointment. My goal for my clients is that they have a choice in being here. It does not have to be heavy. I asked them to talk about things that brought them there, how they came to be on assistance. Some replies, I don't know, my addiction, I have anxiety, I hurt all the time, I don't know if I can be employed, I don't know what to do, I don't understand what I'm supposed to do. I often ask, what do you do besides drink or do drugs, or be in pain or have anxiety? What are those things that make you smile and those moments of clarity in your day? Giving choice to clients who feel they have no choice creates healthy, productive dynamics. I start by saying, I know you feel you have to be here, and yes, you have to be here. Yes, we're here for an hour, so let's make the most of it. I explain what we're going to do, and you could see sweat pouring down or the agitation starting, and they're stressed out or they're nervous. I give many opportunities for breaks. I explain where the washroom is, show them where the coffee room is, and always make clear that they don't have to ask permission to do these things. I ensure that my clients know that they can get up and go at any time, even if it's just for a breather, a smoke, or a stretch. I'm fine with breaks, but the key is talking about this prior to starting the appointment, as it gives the greatest gift, choice. Sometimes I say I can't do this right now, and I remind them the door is closed, it's not locked. By giving choice, clients are way more engaged. Thank you. I'd like to introduce Gudad.
White, ni Simnaskatni, Luxkeekni, Wilkskinisum Smoggit, Sagawan, Chief Mountain, James Robinson, Gingolith Witwi, Vancouver, BC, Wiljagai. My name is Gudad Andrea Abdulin. I am from the Nisga'a Nation. I am in the Eagle tribe from the house of Skinisum Smoggit, Sagawan, Chief Mountain. I come from the village of Kincolith, and I live in Vancouver, BC, on the unceded land of the Coast Salish people. I'm currently employed within the employment plan of BC as a case manager for Access, located at the downtown east side. To be employed is learned behavior. These were the teachings bestowed on me by the people in my life that love and care enough to want to see me succeed. My grandmother, Dorothy F. Robinson, always said, if there was education available to me, like there's education to you kids now, I would be the Prime Minister. She'd said this to all of us, all of the children growing up all the time, to encourage us to get more education and to be employed. As I grew up, all I can remember is everyone I knew and looked up to worked very hard in one way or another. Everybody contributed and provided for their families, whether it was in a monetary or a loving way, meaning that they either provided for their family by working any job that they could, or they stayed home and ensured that the food that was being provided was prepared for the family and ensuring the health and well-being of the children. With constant encouragement from my parents and grandparents, aunts and uncles, work was inevitable. I found my first job with Service Canada on a student program as I lived off of the reserve. I worked as a waitress from the age of 16, which was the minimum age. During this time, I went to school, graduated high school in 1988. I worked summer seasonal jobs in a cannery from 1987 to the year 2000 as a shore worker, and there was the local fish processing plant. I worked many positions in the cannery during my employment. For some people, the cannery was the only employment throughout the year. For others, they worked 2 months out of the year as a second job and would work anywhere from 16 to 18 hours a day. Many of the employers in the community of Prince Rupert were aware of the job opportunity and would allow their employees to take leave of absence or would accommodate their schedules for the summer times. I returned to post-secondary school after having my children and achieved a diploma in business administration in 2008. During school, I still worked as a server at the local pub, was a full-time mother and a housekeeper at a hotel. Post-graduation, I held my first position as a bookkeeper at a successful local family-owned welding and fabricating business. The industry and work became scarce in Prince Rupert. I then moved to Vancouver in 2012, and the job search was great and required commitment. The competition was great. After further training through Access, who's now my employer, I successfully gained employment at the City of Vancouver in 2013 and still obtained contract work with the City of Vancouver. I also worked as a support worker at the Aboriginal Mother Centre from 2012 to recent. Working as a case manager was a great choice, as having knowledge and understanding of the clientele and the local communities was an asset. I'm particularly proud of one of my clients who is a young lady that had run away from home when she was 17 years old, and she had to come to me because she was BCA employment obligated. So she was told that she needed to come and see me. So we discussed about some of her employment options. She hadn't graduated high school. She'd never had a job ever. She was now 22 years old. So she came to me to secure her income assistance, to ensure that her rent was paid, to ensure that she would have food. So we discussed some of her options, and we decided that she would take an 8-week training course at Have Cafe in Vancouver. And Have Cafe has a free training program, on-the-job training. So she started that, and about 4 weeks later, she came back to me and said that she wanted to quit. She wasn't able to get along with the supervisor, and she was just from her own person, it was tough for her to get into employment. The transition was hard for her. So we talked a little bit about that, and we talked about not always being able to get along with everybody in your workplace. You weren't going to be able to do that. So she accepted it, and so we contacted Have, and they accepted her back into the program. 2 weeks later, she came to me and she said that they hired me. She said before she was even done her training, they had hired her to teach. So they're going to be working with her. They're going to help build her up for the next 4 years, and she'll be getting her Red Seal in culinary arts. So she's quite excited about that. She came to the office again after that, and she was telling my supervisor that, that was me. That was me standing out on the corner there. And now I don't have to worry about how I'm going to feed my dog, how I'm going to take care of myself. And she's so proud of having an income to be able to buy things that she always wanted to buy. So I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of her. And working in the downtown east side has so many challenges, from persons with multiple barriers, persons with disabilities, and people that struggle with addictions and homelessness. Our candidates some of them haven't been employed for years. Some were born into the downtown east side. Some are generations. There's the 4th and 5th generation people in the downtown east side that have never left there. They've never experienced life outside of the downtown east side. So it's very hard to build them up to the place where they will have the strength and the courage to leave, to find education or to find employment. So that's some of the challenges that we face in the downtown east side.
My name is Tracy. I am from Hakluk community, which resides in the Upper Statlam Territory. I am the second youngest of 7 sisters, no brothers. I ran away from Lowell when I was 15. I experienced childhood trauma not only at Kamloops Residential School, but in the Hakluk community. As a young teenager, I did not know how to deal with the trauma. I ended up running away with my older sister, Rena, not knowing or caring where it was going. It wasn't until I had my 3 children that I realized that I had responsibilities and I did not want to raise my children in the city of Kamloops. I moved to Merritt, where I resided there for 15 years. I was a stay-at-home mom, wanted to change my life, so I quit drinking. As a previous unemployed single parent who struggled to fulfill my dreams, I experienced how difficult it was searching for full-time employment with a grade 9 education and no skills training or work experience. I was living in Merritt for a few years before I decided that I wanted to pursue my education and get my grade 12. When I registered to go to school to do my adult dogwood at Caribou College, I found out I could only do 1 year. The ministry had it where I could go to school 1 year, then not the following year. The following year, I had to find employment. I was working 1 or 2 part-time jobs as a janitorial just to make ends meet. The following year, I struggled. I struggled going to school, feeling I was not smart enough. But I did not give up. Being on income assistance, the ministry sent me to the Employment Center in Merritt to take a job readiness workshop. I was angry. I did not want to participate. They were making me take the workshops as they would hold my check if I didn't participate. I was in an unhealthy relationship. My spouse drank and did drugs. The ministry found out and told me I was putting my children at risk. I was very angry with the ministry. I made an appointment to see a worker. Her name was Danny. She was a redhead with short hair and very petite. She said to me, "I'm here to help you and your children. I do not wish to take your children from you." I talked to her and told her about myself. It was then I was no longer angry. I did all the workshops. I returned to school for a few years and found my supports at the Canadian Friendship Center. I connected with 2 loving and caring ladies. I started volunteering there, cooking 2 times a week. They gave me an honorarium and ended up asking me to cook for the remaining year. Canadian Friendship Centre hired me as a community cultural coordinator. That is when I started socializing with different people in the community. I worked closely with the elders. I coordinated community dinners for the 4 seasons, spring, summer, fall, and winter, organized Christmas hampers, and worked at their bingos. Coordinated cultural activities like picking, fishing, and canning. And then my contract ended as a community cultural coordinator, and then I was forced to start doing labor employment. I worked at Nicola Post and Rail as a laborer, and I worked at Days Inn and Nicola Tribal Association doing janitorial in the evenings and mornings. Then I was rehired working a full-time job as a program coordinator. I started to build confidence and felt encouraged to take more training. I walked in the Nicola Valley Institute of Technology and talked to academic advisor about the programs and courses they offer. She mentioned the chemical addiction certificate program was being offered free of tuition with books included. I was excited and scared at the same time. I could hear my heart pounding. I was terrified. I was not smart enough, and I would have to commit myself to full-time schooling. It was year 2009 when I started the chemical addiction certificate program. The Canadian Friendship Centre allowed me to take the time off to go to school. I completed my certificate and diploma. I did not complete my 3rd year in chemical addiction program. I was then forced to find employment. In 2012, I relocated to Lillooet for employment with the Lillooet Friendship Centre partnership with Open Door Group. I was terrified as that would have meant that I would have to face all my fears, and one of the things that I was running away from was the abuse that happened in my community. When I started working, I was not sure if I could fulfill the employment advisor position to the best of my ability. I told my spouse, I don't know if I can do this. Women have to move back to Merritt. He talked to me and just said, try it out for a month or 2. If you feel the same, we can move back. I really wanted to move back to Merritt as it was my comfort zone, and I had all my supports there as well. After 2 months, and it started getting easier for me, I tried to find supports in Lillooet for myself. I found a women's group that gave me a lot of support and encouragement. Sometimes I feel part of me wants to go back to Merritt to be closer to my children and grandchildren. I attended Kamloops residential school in 1970 to 73. I was very young. I was 5. I was so excited to go as I watched all my older siblings go to residential school. I cried for them when they left. I was so happy and excited when I arrived there. I walked into this big red building. We were separated by age, and they put us into different dorms. Some of the impacts I experienced is post-traumatic stress. When we were there, we were separated. It made it difficult for me to engage in family and social events. The only time I could see my siblings was when we were eating or doing sports activities. I could not talk to them. I could only see them from a distance. Being away from my parents for a long time, it prevented me from learning parenting skills. I was a mother at a young age. I did not know how to be a mother. I took a parenting skills workshop in Merritt, and even then, I'm still learning as I went along. When I was removed from my home at the age of 5, from my family, I longed to learn my language and culture. I was open to learn culture from another community in Merritt, but my dad told me it was not who I was. The elders in the Merritt community took me in and taught me the importance of picking teas, roots, and medicine. I also learned how to build, cleanse, and pray for the 4 seasons in a sweat lodge. I took Thompson language class for 2 semesters at NVIT. I was so excited to come back and speak the language to my dad. When I did, he said, "No, that's not your language." I was hurt and felt sad. I now understand what he was trying to tell me. Without my language and culture, I don't know who I am and where I come from, the loss of identity. I'd like to move forward with the seasonal and cultural traditions.
In this picture, you can see I'm fishing. My sister and nieces wake up at 4 a.m. and we go fishing from 5 to 7 a.m., then go home, take a shower, and head to work. I work in an office where we must remain open from 8 to 4:30 Monday to Friday. Everyone in our office practices traditional harvesting during harvest seasons. As an employee of the Friendship Center, we were allotted 2 harvest days a year. Of the 7 staff in our office, 4 are Friendship Center staff. Being lowest of seniority in my office as a new employee at Open Door Group, I no longer have harvest days to be able to take off. I need to be creative. Here are a few things that I do. I'm able to barter or trade for canned goods by supplying enough product in jars to can for both of us. I also provide money if the person prefers. I've traded furniture sets for lids of wood, as well as clothing or shoes for canned, fresh, frozen, and dried food. I'm a shopper. I have a great uncle who still provides game meat to all of the family, as that is his job. I've hired him to do chainsaw work for me, and he is willing to lose a day's pay to go out hunting instead of choosing work. I do gain, as he'll provide me with a quarter of the game. I also have a great relationship with my brother-in-law. I provide the ride, the fish wrap, wrapping tape, and space to clean fish. He doesn't drive or have a valid driver's license or have transportation. I drop him off in the morning before work, pick him up at lunch, take him to have lunch at my house, then take him back to the fishing rocks until I finish work. We both get our fish for the season. I feel quite lucky to be in a financial situation, to be able to work and still gain the necessities that I require. This is not an option for most people, and they have to choose.
The culture I learned comes from the Merritt area. I was taught from an elder there. I celebrate the 4 seasons by going for a sweat 4 times a year, usually the summer after a sweat because it's so close to Aboriginal Day. And then we will go for a sweat and have a big feast and a giveaway. I do the picking of herbs and berries is usually when we start the teas and medicines in the summertime. I will do picking fruit, and then it goes, and then in the summertime I do picking fruits, and then I go fishing, I dry fish, I can freeze. To me, as a young mother, I did not know the importance of preserving food, even though I thought the gas was going to cost too much. The cost of the jars, everything is so costly. It is important to me coming winter time. In July, oh, sorry, that's it. I was going into something else.
Okay. Joe?
We celebrate the New Year, February. They call it the Hobier. And we also collect the food that was given to all the people. And we also made the new food, so they put it on a table. And people come around and they eat the food that's given. And our people pray to the great Creator for all those food. We never forget about the great Creator, created all things. And that's the reason why we have a celebration of OBA. We also put in the March. People are wondering how come we put the March. Because we have Ulican season, and we have a big dance on that too. And that's the reason why we have Ulican season for February. It's actually on March, and that's how we done it every year. We celebrate that with all the people that believes in our traditional way. And the reason why we do it every year, because we wanted to let these young people understand our way of living, so that they'll continually do the same thing. For this February, we're having one down here in Vancouver. It's not the actual one, but we do celebrate it. We don't celebrate it to the way it is. We do it up home, but we still do it down here with all the people that come and watch us. Like when we say all the people, that means all the dance group that come in and they dance for the new year. So we include everybody. We just don't include the Nisga'a people. We include all the Aboriginal people and all other nation that wants to join and feel the good feeling of enjoying the new year.
Of the Kwakwala speaking people, I think every season has a reason. We do most of our harvesting according to the seasons, for fishing, for gathering berries and roots, and drying fish. And of course today, we dry fish, can fish. And we do most of that in preparation for what we call the winter season. And that's our high spiritual season, when we have our traditional cultural celebrations in our big houses. And of course, every step along the way, we give thanks to the Creator for what He provides us with. The cedar tree that gives so many utilities for our people. The roots and the berries and the animals who sacrifice their lives so that we can eat. When people go hunting, and we do all the harvesting in the mostly summer and spring, and then when it gets to the winter season, that's when we gather in the big houses and lift up our children mostly, so and give them the teachings then, so that when their time comes, they can follow, just like us, in the footsteps of our ancestors.
This is Susanna again, and we're going to wrap this up in a bit different, but a number of people have sent in responses along the way, and I just want to mention a lot of just thanking you so much, our presenters, Joe and Esther, for sharing your knowledge and your stories. And I'm usually not speechless, but today I just want to say thank you. And I think that's just simple, just a big, big thank you to our presenters and to Joe and Esther. And in closing, we want to share with you, we started with a prayer and song, and we'll be closing in the same way, but we're going to be showing a video. So thank you very much for everyone who's been on the webinar with us, and I know you have learned a lot, just like I have sitting here, and just with the engagement, and I will be using the knowledge I learned today and moving forward, and it will touch me in very many different parts of my work and also in my personal life. Thank you.
Hi babe, we're doing a presentation. We're wondering if you would like to do a closing song for us. Nada vez para la